Why did tank destroyers disappear after the Second World War? Tank destroyers were among the most influential armored vehicles of World War II. For example, during this conflict, over 10,500 StuG III were produced in all its variants, compared to the 5,774 units produced of its sibling design. The Panzer III, we see a huge difference, and it tells us the great influence these vehicles had in this conflict. Although the StuG III was really an assault gun, not a tank destroyer, but it was extensively used for this latter purpose due to its apparent great utility for this. In its early months, there were cases where small groups of StuG III defeated large groups of Soviet armored vehicles with almost no casualties. Why, even though they were produced more than tanks and sometimes even more effective, did tank destroyers and assault guns almost disappear to the point of non-existence today? Was it because they ceased to be effective or for some other more complicated reason? In this video, you will get all the answers to these questions. Like everything in the military world, the tank destroyer emerged as a response to a need, in this case to save and reduce costs. The first tank destroyer was invented by the Germans in the mid-30s as an attempt to modernize the by then ineffective Panzer, which were used in the invasion of Poland and France. They mainly used two MG-34 machine guns as their primary weapons. To give these tanks superior utility, a 1.85 inches Skodak anti-tank gun was mounted on them, which gave it the name Panzerjäger Viper. These performed very well in the Battle of France and, of course, continued in North Africa. The concept of tank hunting was very well received by the German High Command, of course considering that these armored vehicles were made from the chassis of the Panzer I that were going to be decommissioned anyway for being ineffective. Armored vehicles like the Mater II are examples of how the Germans tried to extensively recycle their equipment. Even these Mater II were made with captured Soviet cannons. The Germans realized the potential of these armored vehicles since they had the ability to destroy tanks and were absurdly cheap to produce. In this way, they gave a second life to armored vehicles that were about to become obsolete. But they could only produce these vehicles in a limited way because obviously there were not infinite Panzer I chassis or infinite captured military equipment. So at the end of the 30s, they decided to focus on an experimental design based on the Panzer Permamine chassis, the StuG III, which was initially designed as an assault gun to support the infantry against fortified positions, which in 1940 would see its first combats on the Eastern Front against the Soviet Union, having an apparent great performance as a tank hunter. The StuG III are credited with the defeat of over 30,000 enemy vehicles in total. It's probably the largest figure in history. In fact, something very curious about the StuG III is that 57 of these were given to Finland. And in the entire conflict against the Soviet Union, Finland only lost 8 StuG III. These groups of StuG III destroyed more than 87 Soviet armored vehicles. And most of these 8 destroyed StuG III were destroyed by the same crew so they wouldn't be captured. The German High Command, observing the excellent performance of the StuG III, compared of course to its production cost, decided to make versions of tank destroyers specifically designed for the task, with the intention of making cheaper armored vehicles that could effectively face enemy tanks, resulting in a complete series of tank destroyers like the Jagdpanzer, based on the chassis of the Panzer IV and which were in fact a direct request from General Guderian. In the case of the Jagdpanzer, the chassis base was from the Panther. Also in the Tiger, in the case of the Jagdtiger, or even Czechoslovakian tanks, as is the case with the Helser, made specifically to equip the famous German anti-tank battalions. Thanks to these armored vehicles, the Germans were able to resist much longer in the conflict, as these vehicles were considerably cheaper to produce than tanks, since they did not have a mobile turret, in addition to significantly increasing their reliability and, of course, having a lower profile than conventional tanks. The Soviets, of course, would not be left behind. They designed from the effective T-34 the Su-85 with 85mm cannons and the fearsome Su-100 with 100mm cannons. In addition to the Iosif Stalin U-122 models and Iosif Stalin U-152, the latter carrying a monstrous 152.4mm cannon and which shared components with the IS-2 heavy tank. Definitely, the Soviet doctrine was more interesting, having tank hunters with really fearsome cannons, specifically designed for the job. However, they were significantly less produced than the German models, but they performed excellently in the same way. By the end of the conflict in 1945, more than 40,000 tank hunters had been produced among all the conflicting sides, obviously leaving many remnants. Tank technology had advanced by leaps and bounds during the conflict thanks to the war effort, and by the 50s, significant improvements emerged in the suspension of tanks, the cannon, and more substantially in the armor, with tank models emerging that were abysmally superior to World War II tanks. The development of more powerful engines, better suspension systems, and lighter composite armors in the early Cold War allowed a post-war combat vehicle to have the firepower of a super heavy tank, the protection of a heavy tank, and the mobility of a light tank while having the weight of a medium combat vehicle from the end of the Second World War. So the armies, having the technology, chose to design tanks that knew all the roles of combat armor or a large part of them, creating the concept of main battle tank or main battle tank, reducing the need to have a type of armored vehicle for each role. In the case of tank destroyers, these disappeared as the main battle tanks supplanted the need for a tank destroyer, making it no longer necessary. Tank destroyers didn't disappear, they adapted to new needs. After the 60s, thanks to armament advances related to the improvement of projectiles and the invention of guided missiles, any armored vehicle could have the ability to destroy tanks without problems, making the need to have a specific type of armored vehicle designed to destroy tanks also reduced. For example, we have many armored personnel transport vehicles equipped with anti-tank missiles, such as the BGM-71 tube-launched, optically tracked, wire-guided. However, despite all of this, some models of tank destroyers were still produced around the world. For example, we have the Italian-wheeled B-1 Centauro with a 105mm cannon, or the French AMX 10RCs, which also have wheels and a 105mm cannon. And even though tank destroyers, as we remember them, disappeared, there is no doubt that they are among the most enigmatic and memorable vehicles in military history, and they left their mark on history.